whatever you're experiencing in your life that's painful, that's an opportunity for you to say, how can I leverage this pain into behavior change?
Welcome back, everybody, to the Abundant Journey podcast. Thank you for hanging out with us today. As always, I am Nick James with Nick Offenkamp, and we have a first on the podcast, don't we, Nick?
We sure do, and I'm thrilled, man. I'm so excited about our guest today.
Absolutely. We have Elaine Stageberg hanging out with us, and if you recognize the name Stageberg, because it is not a very common name, it is because we last year had the only other Nick we've had on the podcast, which was Nick Stageberg, and so we had 3 Nicks with the podcast, and then right now we have Elaine, his wife, hanging out with us today. Elaine, thank you for hanging out. How are you?
I am doing well. What a funny, cute introduction.
We try to make it fun.
Well, we've been so excited. So here's the thing, Nick is still, we've had some amazing guests. I don't know that we've had anybody who's been able to match his energy. And so there's been this question of man, who is the woman that it can keep up with that man and build anyhow. So we've been really looking forward to getting to connect with you. And you guys have built an incredible it's hard to even just put it in one word, everything that you do, because you're investing, you're in real estate, there's a foundation, all of these things that we'll get into. But all to say, we've been very excited to have you on. And since I've completely blundered how to describe what it is that you do, if somebody were just meeting you off the street and they're like, Elaine, what do you do? How would you answer them?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do an introduction. I'll start with a little funny story. So the day Nick and I met, we met online, and then we had planned our first date, and we met at a Barnes & Noble that had a Starbucks in the back. And we met at the front door. I think we shook hands or something kind of awkward like that. And then next thing you know, he's at the Starbucks, and I'm still halfway through the store that. He just, speaking of the woman that can keep up with him. And I remember in that moment sort of looking at his back and thinking, I should just turn around and leave. And when he orders his coffee, and then he's like, oh, well, she'll have, and then he turns there would be no me.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful that in that moment I was like, wait a second. I woke up, I put my makeup on for this. I'm getting my free
yeah, that's right.
I just get chills when I think of oh my gosh, what if I hadn't, finished that date and eventually gone on to marry him? And I know that he loves me a ton because he walks slowly to keep pace with me. And he even slowed down as we had children, and, we go slower now. But it's funny when I'll maybe see him at a store or something without me, and he's just running around the store getting things. And he is a person with a very fast tempo. So we're Nick and Elaine Stageberg. We're husband and wife, and I'm a psychiatrist by training. Nick had a career in IT. We've been married for about 13 years. We have 4 children, 8 and under, and we are real estate investors. So along the way, as we were doing our professional careers and building our family, we also were real estate investors. Built a portfolio of single family homes, built a property management company, eventually did joint ventures. Then we launched our private equity funds. Today we have about $350 million in assets under management of single family homes and large multifamily communities in Rochester, Minnesota and Tacoma, Washington. Deeply vertically integrated. We work with investors directly, broker most of our own deals, have our own property management company, maintenance, lawn, snow. Huge believers in vertical integration. I really think that it can accelerate a business's growth, not just in real estate, but in many different sectors. And it's just a ton of fun to get to run our company together by day and our family together by night, and cast our vision of what we would like for our marriage and our family and the business, and get to wake up every day and do that together.
I love that. And there's a million ways to take this conversation. But before we dive more into the stuff you guys are passionate about today, the things you're running at today, collectively in the different roles, let's go back because we got a little bit of Nick's early story of childhood and the things that really shaped and molded him, but we don't know yours. So let's go there. Tell us as far back as you want to go. Obviously, you have the medical background and the history, and you were working a great job there. But if you want to go back before that, great. But take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. So Nick and I actually had very similar childhoods, even though he was born and raised in Rochester, Minnesota. I was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We didn't meet until we were in our 20s in Oklahoma City. But we both came from families with, pretty exceptional poverty and just a lot of scarcity, and not just financial scarcity, but resource scarcity, time scarcity, love scarcity. And that really shaped us. And we both had some positive influences along the way that allowed us to have an abundant view of the world, despite the fact that we came from such scarcity. And then one of the things that kind of unified us early on is I was legally emancipated when I was 16 years old. And although Nick wasn't legally emancipated, he essentially moved out and started living with friends and then eventually on his own when he was 14. It's pretty rare to find that. And so these topics came up, even on our first date. And we both knew we had a clear vision for taking the pain that we had had in our childhoods and having not only a really good adulthood, but eventually using that to have a good marriage and to have children and to shape their values and just really turn the family tree for ourselves. And I think that's why we were just, so connected. And even in the very beginning is we, kind of dove right past the superficial things in first date and immediately went to those shared experiences. And then I eventually went to medical school. Nick was working in his IT career at the time. We had a little car dealership for a few years as our first kind of foray into entrepreneurship. Then we started doing real estate investing. A lot of folks asked, how did we know to do that if we had come from financial scarcity? And basically, we went to people who were a generation ahead of us, maybe coworkers that we had, parents of friends, people who we perceived to be successful and happy. And we asked them all sorts of questions. How are you happy in your marriage? What did you do well with your children? What would you do differently with your children? How have you handled your finances? Because we couldn't learn those lessons from our own family. So we had to go to other families to learn that. And time again, we kept hearing about real estate. And so we decided very early on in our marriage that we would invest in real estate. We both owned a home before we were married, converted my home into a rental, moved into his home. About 3 years later, bought our first purposeful rental that we did sweat equity on. It had been vacant for 9 years with all of the horrors that you can imagine when you hear that. We did almost all of the renovations ourselves. Of course, we had to hire professionals for things like the roof, the plumbing, electrical, those sorts of things, and just got bit by that real estate bug and kept growing, had our children during those years, moved to Rochester, Minnesota so that I could train at Mayo Clinic as a psychiatrist. And then eventually we had financial freedom. Nick left his career in tech in 2019. I left my career in medicine in 2020. And then here we are today.
I love that. Well, and a question that comes up, Elaine, thinking about a lot of people who come from similar situations to you guys. And I think there's this maybe voice or current that we hear a lot of, hey, you're not going to be able to break out of that. But you both individually and collectively had this humility and teachableness to say, I want to go find the answers to strive for something greater. What fueled that in you?
Yeah, when I think about, there's been many different experiences like that in my life. And obviously I saw that a ton in my patients as a psychiatrist. And I think as humans, we have this really wonderful ability to take pain and turn it into something really amazing. And so I think both Nick and I saw the pain that we were experiencing in childhood and saw the pain that our parents were experiencing with finances and breakdown in relationships. My father had very serious substance use illness. He eventually died of an opioid overdose. And we said, we don't want to continue living that pain. And we would rather have other sorts of pain, i.e. being emancipated at 16 and having to work through high school and experiencing that type of poverty, but knowing that I could continue the pain that I was already in, or I could have a different type of pain and kind of claw my way out of it. Very similar when I decided to leave medicine in 2020. if you had asked me in, say, 2019, did I have intentions to leave medicine? I would have said, maybe in 8 to 10 years, we have this real estate portfolio, but I really thought I had the whole vision in my head. I thought we would have an office building and Nick would have the real estate practice on the left side and I would have the medical practice on the right side. And we would kind of hang out and have lunch together in the afternoon. And then in 2020, we had 3 young children. COVID was raging. Every single time that telephone rang, it was the school saying the kids couldn't come to school for 10 more days. And I was just like, man, this is really painful. I'm not taking very good care of my children. I never know what's going to happen in my schedule. I'm canceling on my patients left and right, which is really hard in any doctor's appointment, but particularly your relationship with a psychiatrist.
Right.
And so I said, I don't want this pain to continue. Another painful choice I could make is to choose to step away from medicine and go off and just run our company and just grow that and see what comes of that. And that was really scary after, building a career in medicine. But think about whatever to the listener, whatever you're experiencing in your life that's painful, that's an opportunity for you to say, how can I leverage this pain into behavior change? Humans rarely make behavior change based on information. We sometimes make behavior change based on emotion. We almost always make behavior change when we have either an identity shift or we have enough leverage over ourselves. When we say, I am a person who X, or I am not a person who X, or I no longer can live like this. I will no longer tolerate, not being able to keep up with my kids at the playground. I am going to become a healthy person. When we have that identity shift, that pain, it can catapult us into, extraordinary personal growth. And I think once you have that perspective, then all pain in life is just less painful because you just see it as like a riddle to solve of like, oh, if I experience this, yes, it's uncomfortable, but I know that growth is going to come from it. I wonder what growth will come. I wonder who I'll be as I navigate through this pain.
I love that mentality. And I mean, it kind of flies in the face of what I see so much more prevalent of kind of falling into a victim mentality of just that I am a product of my circumstances and kind of the woe is me. It's understandable. It can be really sympathetic. The folks that have experienced really awful things, or any of us can think of times in our lives where it's just like it would be easy to just lay down and take it. But it is amazing the way that you've been able to transform pain into progress. I'm curious if there were voices or books or things that you think really gave you that perspective early on? Because it sounds like you came to that realization at a pretty young age of just that it's like, I'm not going to fall into just being a victim to my situation, but I am going to make something of this pain and of these experiences.
Yeah, I didn't realize it at the time, but as I went into adulthood and really, sat and asked myself over a period of months and even years, like, how did I make it out, right? People go through almost kind of a survivor's guilt, right? Because my father eventually died of a drug overdose. I saw the pain that was still happening with my aunts and uncles and my cousins who were my age. And yet I had created such a different life, such a life of abundance, and,
right.
Not just financially, but love and in my marriage and with my children and friends and connections. And when I really think back to it, I had this beautiful experience, again, from pain, that when I was 3 years old, essentially, I no longer could live with my mother because her uncle had been sexually abusing my brother and I. So we were taken from that home because of the courts. I couldn't live with my father because he was in jail because of repeated driving under the influences. So my brother and I were potentially going to go to foster care. And my aunt and uncle, my dad's brother and his wife, took us in for what was supposed to be, I think, the 120 days that my father was going to be in the local county jail. Turns out we lived there for about 5.5 years. Mm-hmm. And I was 3.5 to 8.5. Those are really formative years in a person's development and their view of the world. And I didn't, of course, I didn't know that as a child, right? I just knew that my aunt and uncle loved me, and we had a lot of financial scarcity there, but we didn't have any emotional scarcity. I was deeply loved. We went to the library. We would go for walks outside all the time. They would walk me to school every day. I just remember just a very nice, 1990s childhood. And I was so young, I didn't realize that we didn't have any money. And that really laid the foundation for me. My father became sober. He was sober for a while, got custody of my brother and I. There were a few years where he was sober before he relapsed, and then eventually became addicted to opioids as well. But then when he, relapsed into his addiction and our family just kind of came crumbling down, because I had that foundation that had been built at 4, 5, 6, even though I didn't have the words for it, I had a sense at say 13, 14, 15, this isn't right. This isn't how life should be lived. It's not normal to stay up all night wondering if your father is going to get into a car accident and kill someone else because he's intoxicated, or just the dysfunction in our home. And that's what gave me the courage to say, the moment I'm legally able to be emancipated, I want to be emancipated. And then I really thank my father that when I went to him at say 15 and a half, and I said, Dad, I have this plan, but I need you to sign the paperwork basically, because I will either have to fight you in court or you give permission for me to be legally emancipated. And he said yes, and he signed the paperwork. And I know that was really hard for him, right? At the time, I was so angry with him and I'm going to show you, and I'm going to go out and create this perfect life that you couldn't give me. And as I got older, into my 20s, I really came to see what an act of grace and courage that was for me, that wasn't easy for him to legally admit to the court systems that he had failed his children, not just once when we were children, young children, but again, when I was, a fledgling adult, and, instead coming to see the life that I have is because of him and because of the pain that I experienced because of him, that gave me this leverage to go out and create a different life. And that if he had had the resources that I had had as a child, like therapy and social workers and social support systems, right? The stuff that was available in the 80s, 90s that wasn't available for him in the 60s and 70s, maybe his life trajectory would have turned out differently. And mine did, because of those formative years with my aunt and uncle, because he was courageous enough to sign that paperwork for me, and then because of this support system that society had available to me at the time. And that really changed everything for me. That happened in my mid-20s. And instead of kind of living with a chip on my shoulder of I'm going to prove to my family that I'm kind of better than all of them, there was more of a sense of, wow, so many things just really fell into place for me. And, almost like I owe it to God to do right by all of that stuff that was given to me.
Yeah. I so appreciate you going there with us and letting us in on those formative experiences. I mean, it's just a powerful story. And I know that for us and for our listeners too, it's so helpful to hear those kind of stories because people see themselves in it, and it paints a new horizon of possibility for folks that do feel at the bottom of pain. I'm curious, with obviously you and Nick have built a very incredible and very intentional life. Not that I want to get too far ahead in terms of jumping around in your story, but I know that these experiences have shaped you wanting to live with a lot of purpose and make a difference. And so I'm curious how that has informed your decisions to go into medicine, and then even with leaving medicine, kind of getting into the why of what you're doing now with Black Swan.
So my decision to go into medicine was really, basically what we just touched upon, that as I went into young adulthood, I realized that it was because of all of these services that had been available to me, things like social workers, doctors, therapists, guidance counselors at school, really good teachers, people who were a generation ahead of me, who were dedicating their life to serving, my generation. And I was, of course, particularly interested in psychiatry, understanding people's life stories, understanding how you can take struggle and turn it into something meaningful, treating depression, treating anxiety, helping people to create an empowering story around things that have happened to them, particularly traumatic things instead of, as you mentioned earlier, becoming a victim to those traumas, instead saying, what good do I have in my life that I wouldn't otherwise have if I hadn't had this trauma? So just so grateful for the opportunity to have trained as a psychiatrist and trained in all the different therapeutic modalities. And then now in my role at Black Swan, I principally work with investors, which really is a lot of psychiatry, right? Because about money is a very sensitive topic for people, right? Money and sex are the two things that people bring, not just, their own decades of baggage, but generations and whole cultures of experience. And they're areas where people want freedom. They want to be able to express themselves and make their own choices, and oftentimes change the choices that they were raised in their own family or their culture or the times that they were raised. And so being able to really connect with people around, what does this passive income mean to you? How did you earn the money that you'll be using to invest? And what are you hoping to do with the returns? And really connecting them to the emotion of it. That it's not just math. It really represents the life that they've created to create the capital, and then the dreams that they have with the returns. And then I lead our property management team, which is all about teaching people how to serve our residents at the highest level. As far as I know, we are the only physician-owned property management company in the whole country. Before I went to medical school, I actually have a master's degree in public health. And so I think about the living experience and how much that impacts people's health, both their physical health and their psychological health. People want good, safe places to live where they feel connected to the community, where they feel like they're seen and heard and they're a part of something bigger than themselves, where their needs are met with, quick responses to questions that they have or maintenance concerns that they have. And training our property management team that, of course, we do asset management, of course, we do property management, but really we're building living experiences for people. And that's what separates us from everyone else. So I actually, I obviously don't prescribe medications anymore, but I think as a psychiatrist, most hours of every single day.
Man, that's awesome. And I've never heard either one of those explained quite like that. One, the emotional connection with money and hitting that side of it, just because there is an emotional response and there's dreams and goals and hopes that people have to be able to accomplish. And those can be closer accomplished with money. And so that's a huge piece to that. Interesting as you talk about really that community focus. Was that something that you guys started in wanting to be different was that initiated by you? Was there a mentor in your space or in your life that really influenced you guys to build the business that way?
So I wouldn't say there was a particular mentor or influence, but basically we looked at the property management industry, and especially coming from tech and medicine, which are such professional industries with such high levels of professionalism, work ethic, standards. Property management isn't quite like that. It's a little bit different. And so we saw the options that were out there, and, we just felt like, hey, we could have the physical property, but if it's coupled with this level of service, this isn't really what we want to, create our family's wealth or legacy around. So all the way from the very beginning, we made the decision to self-manage. That was pretty easy because I had lived in that home for several years, so I knew it very well. It was a nice kind of stepping stone transition. We lived just like a mile away from it. And then we just made that decision all the way through. When we got to about 25 properties or so, and it was just too much for us to handle alone, right? There was always a maintenance ticket, always a turnover, always a unit that needed to be leased. Then we had to go through that second round of decision and ask ourselves, okay, at this point, do we go out and we find a rock star property management company and turn our portfolio over to them, or do we create a property management company? And that was a huge undertaking. Nick and I were both still working full time. I think we had one or maybe two children at that point, and we were also investors. And we said, you know what? We're going to create a property management company because we really think that the physical properties coupled with the service and the community building is really what makes this not only very profitable for us, but very meaningful. It really gives these homes life, right? So we created a property management company, grew that over several years. And then eventually, as we scaled our passive investments with our joint ventures and our private equity fund. Now we have grandfathered in our third-party property management clients from those years, but we will only now newly manage what we own with our investors. And so that's been kind of a nice return to our original years when we were managing only our own portfolio. We've kind of come full circle there.
Yeah. Well, and thinking about the two of you working jobs, building the portfolio, building the property management, and the kids, and there's been kids added along the way. One of the things I wanted to ask you is, hustle culture is very vocal right now on social media, on, all of the people who are ultra successful say you kind of have to give up your soul in order to reach success. But that's not something that you guys believe or have lived out. So how do you keep your family intact? How do you not succumb to hustle culture yet still do what you guys have been able to do?
I know.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I hear everything that you're describing that you guys do, and I'm just like, they've figured out how to have more than 24 hours in a day. Like
that's not true.
It blows my mind. But I didn't mean to cut you off. I just my mind went exactly where Nick's did. Like, how do you balance all this?
Yeah. Let's talk about it from two perspectives. One from the beginning when we were creating it, and then one where we are today. So I think there's nuance to hustle culture. I don't think that someone needs to grind, get burnt out, suffer, lose their health, their spirituality, their family, all the things. That means there's something in misalignment. There were years, probably a 5-year period, where someone looking from the outside might have perceived that Nick and I were grinding. But it didn't feel like a grind to us because we were doing things we loved, right? Mm-hmm. So I was working probably 70 hours a week in the hospital, training as a psychiatrist, doing therapy with my patients, growing myself as I'm doing all this therapy with other people. Nick was building teams of software engineers at Mayo Clinic. We both loved serving Mayo Clinic and felt like it was just the honor of our lifetime to get to serve such an ethics-based, principles-based organization. And then we were growing our real estate portfolio and our property management company, nights and weekends. And we just always found ways to make it fun, right? We would go on drives together and do, driving for dollars. We would renovate our homes together. We would include our children as much as we could. They were, laying grass seed and spraying the hose and doing other things. There was a time, I remember it so vividly, where I was on a stretch of overnights in the hospital. It was probably like a 3-month stretch. So I would leave at 7 p.m. and I would come home at about 8 a.m. And Nick had a more, traditional work career. So he would leave at about 7 a.m. and he would get back at about 5 or 6 p.m. So we would see each other for maybe like 30 or 40 minutes. But we would chat a lot on text message. So we would chat until like midnight or 1 a.m. and then he'd go to bed and I'd go home and go to sleep. And I remember getting home and it was probably like 7:30 or 8 a.m. and I was like a little delirious from lack of sleep. And I put the song Good Old Days by Macklemore on and I listened to it. And, he says, maybe someday we'll realize that today is the good old days. And I just had this realization that for the last several months, either Nick or I had been working for basically 24 hours a day, right? Like when he was sleeping, I was working. When I was sleeping, he was working. And then there were many hours of the day that both of us were working. And I could have looked at that as like, wow, that's terrible. What are we creating? This is a terrible life. Like I could have told myself a very disempowering story. And instead, I told myself an incredibly empowering story of how lucky are we to do this? We're young, we're healthy, we have energy, we're excited to do this. We're doing things that are meaningful to us, both in our daytime work and in our side gig. We're able to include our kids as much as we can, with how little they physically were. They were like 2 years old at that point, but a 2-year-old can spread grass seed. A 2-year-old can, use a paintbrush dipped in water. Like a 2-year-old can hang. And I knew that if we did that for a short period of time, that there would be outcomes that would be unexplainable. I'm not a huge fan of Dave Ramsey in terms of like his financial advice, but a phrase that I want to give credit to him that I absolutely love is if you live like no one else, later you will be able to live like no one else. If you live like no one else, later you will be able to live like no one else. And that's exactly what we did. And we did it from a place of joy and gratitude and just sort of humor of like, this is kind of a crazy life we're living, but we probably don't have to do this for long. And then something really good is going to come of it. So that was kind of the early days. And then eventually you do reach a place where you can't do it all, right? Even though we were both giving it our all, pulling our weight, in our marriage and our house together, in our careers, there's just too much to do. Then you have to find a really good team, and you have to create a culture in your team where people see the work and the meaning that they have, and they see their own vision and their own dreams and aspirations inside of your broader vision. Right? Creating a property management company is not super glamorous, but creating a company where we are creating a premium living experience for a significant portion of our community, people understand that. And they understand that a lease showing means that we're bringing someone new in our community. And a maintenance ticket means that we're solving someone's needs around uncertainty and safety and comfort. And they understand the role that they play in the bigger system. And so just building a really good team who's, we're all rowing in the same direction. And then in addition to our work team, we have a home team, and we run our home like a business where we have people that come to clean and do the laundry and cook for us and help with our children, all of the things, so that when we're at home, we're together, we're talking with our children, we're connecting with them, we're dedicated to the things that we want to do at home because we have a team supporting us with all of the other activities that are just part of daily living.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, that's super, super helpful to just see how things have evolved as you've grown, and certainly that aspect of bringing a team in that can be both rewarding and, I imagine, scary to start to hand over some of the vision and hand over control on things that you were previously doing. I think that also starts to get into, as you've scaled, as you've grown, one of the things that's really unique about what y'all have built is your vertical integration. And that you've been expert team builders on multiple fronts. And so first, for listeners that maybe aren't totally familiar with the idea of vertical integration, could you just give a high level, what does that mean? And then for you guys specifically, what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I love vertical integration. I think it is an incredibly powerful business concept that I think also makes business more enjoyable. So vertical integration is basically you look at the value chain and you incorporate things into the business along the value chain instead of hiring out that business to, say, a third-party vendor or supplier. So in our world, the easiest way to think about it is that first we own the assets, and then we provide the property management. We don't have a third-party property management. We are the property manager. That's kind of the first piece of vertical integration. And then the next piece is we do our own maintenance. And then the next piece is we do our own lawn care, our own snow removal, our own common area cleaning, unit turnover cleaning. Basically, you can think about all of the things that we need to service our building. Is there a way that we can do it in-house? And can we do it in-house at a lower price than hiring a third-party vendor with higher quality that's specifically for our standards with more control and consistency? Because instead of having to do it the way the vendor wants to, we do it the way we want to with our standard operating procedures. And particularly with a portfolio of our size, let's take cleaning, for example. Before we had an in-house cleaning crew, we were probably working with like 10 or 12, maybe even 15 different cleaning vendors. And they all had different specifications. They all had different schedules. They would use different chemicals, all sorts of different practices that they preferred. Well, there's, a management burden to that, but there's also a customer service breakdown that we didn't have a consistent level of service across all of our properties. So by bringing it in-house, we have the Black Swan standard for cleaning in all of our buildings. We use the same chemicals, we have the same schedules, and then we're also able to do it at a lower cost because obviously the reason business exists is to make a profit. So instead of that profit going out to, say, that third-party cleaning company, it stays at the asset level. And then the really unique thing about vertical integration in the world of real estate is that the multiple is so high in real estate. So we're in about a 5 cap market. That's about a 20x multiple. So every dollar that we have fewer expenses at the asset level, instead of, say, that dollar going to profit to a third-party cleaning company, it stays at the asset level. Well, that generates about $20 of asset value. So when the multiple is high, vertical integration becomes even more important. But any business can do vertical integration. Basically, look at your P&L and look for the things that are your biggest cost centers. Who are the vendors that you're using? What are the supplies that you're buying? And ask yourself, how can I bring that in-house? How can I hire someone on my own team directly to do that thing instead of hiring a third-party vendor? Or how can I have control over that supply? Kind of the stereotypical example that you might learn in like business school about vertical integration is a paper company. Well, a paper company needs pulp in order to create paper. So they can buy a company, they can kind of incorporate into their company a company that makes pulp. Then they could even buy a forest and do the lumber work themselves. So then they own the value chain. They own the trees that create the wood, that creates the pulp, that creates the paper. Horizontal integration is doing something that's related. So a paper company might also sell, say, pens, because you typically buy paper and pens together. That's horizontal integration. Vertical integration is about incorporating the steps of the value chain. And again, the way anyone can do it, if you have a business, is look at your P&L, figure out what your biggest expenses are, and then ask yourself, how can I bring this in-house instead of using a third-party vendor or service?
Mm-hmm. And these services that you've created with like the cleaners, the landscapers, are they exclusively serving your Black Swan properties, or can other properties contract with your cleaners? Are you finding ways to make them even more profitable by bringing on clients outside of your portfolio?
So at this time, our vertical integration just services our own properties. We're really focused on having consistency, control, quality, having them available to our properties, right? If there's a snowstorm or an unexpected spill in a building or something like that, theoretically, we could those kind of departments inside of our company could also work with other businesses. There's all sorts of additional layers around legal complexities, insurance, liability, accounting, those sorts of things. So we've made the decision that for our vertical integration, they only service our own properties. But yes, theoretically, they could become kind of standalone businesses themselves.
Yeah. Now, thanks for giving us the breakdown on that. I mean, it is a really, really cool model. And I know that I'm sure a lot of work up front to establish those systems, but we hear it time and time again from our guests that what makes you successful in business is the ability to create those systems and efficiencies, and y'all have been masters of that.
Yeah, I would say each department has taken about a year. Probably took us about 2 years to really build the foundation of our property management company, and then about a year to really have a solid foundation in maintenance, about another year for cleaning, which we call facilities, another year for lawn and snow. And then really the biggest thing that I didn't mention, the greatest benefit of vertical integration is that it gives you what's called overwatch. So if you think about, say, like a third-party cleaner, if they're there to turn over unit 101, they're going to walk past the package room and not care that the packages are all askew. And they might walk past, maybe some dog poop on the way in, and maybe there's some scotch tape in the elevator from a, flyer that was up a few days ago, right? You get a sense of what I'm describing here, because that's their job, right? They weren't hired to look for the dog poop and straighten up the package room and, all the things. But your in-house team, they're hired to do it all. They're hired to create a wonderful living experience. So they know that it's part of the system to have their little doggy bags and to scrape off the Scotch tape and to vacuum the hall while they're there. And so it gives you this additional layer of overwatch over your portfolio that, like, you can't even put a dollar figure on that. And it creates such a warm, welcoming community environment for your residents because they see the same people over and over and over taking care of those properties in every way.
Yeah. Well, one of the things with that, as a banker, I think I've told you I'm a banker, but I see that, multi-billion-dollar companies that are food manufacturers are even doing that. They have the delivery. And so that's such a great strategic model. And there's such a financial practicality. There's a management and overwatch, like you're saying, practicality. But one thing that I do think separates you guys uniquely is this continual theme of we exist to serve. We exist to create a wonderful experience for the people who live here. And that is really the core, one of the cores, I think, of your business is we exist for others. Another way that you guys really focus on that is with your investors. And you run this model, and I want you to speak a little bit more to it of, hey, our investors are going to get their money back before we take fees and we make money. That's pretty unheard of, at least from the conversations that I've had. So what really prompted that? What started it? Again, I think it's that theme around we exist for others and we want to see everybody win together. But dive into that a little bit for me. Yeah,
absolutely. That's one of my favorite things to talk about. So, as you've heard, we started investing with our own capital. We started, we used to do all our own renovations, right? To give you a sense of how deep in the weeds we were. We've always managed our own properties. And so as we scaled and we started working with passive investors, we were not very interested in typical private equity. When we looked at, there's all sorts of fees that general partners can charge. There's prefs and splits and waterfalls. And, it's my belief that the legal complexity of it is so much that like a typical person doesn't really truly understand it. And you have to have very sophisticated calculators to determine the returns. And none of that seemed very interesting to me. I just thought, if that's the path we have to go down, we just won't go down that path. We'll just kind of grow our portfolio at the limits of what we can do with our own capital, and that'll be that. And then I had some mentors that said, you can do private equity however you want. You just call your securities attorney and you tell them what you want it to look like, and they'll draft the documents that way. And that the lesson there is never be afraid to innovate, right? I just was afraid to innovate. Most of the great things that we have, right? We're using virtual technology to, do a recording here together. Like someone had to innovate this. And it was when it was first introduced, it was a crazy idea. And now look at it today. And so we structured our private equity returns through the lens of an investor. So we have no GP level fees whatsoever, no asset management fee, capital event fee, loan recourse fee, acquisition fee, disposition fee. It's our belief that those disalign incentives between general partners and limited partners, because there's a whole bucket of income that general partners can be working for that's completely unavailable to the limited partners. And it changes behavior, right? Humans are motivated by rewards. And so it changes behavior. So we don't charge any of those fees. 100% of all of our profits go back to our partners until they're completely repaid before we have any splits. Again, that just seemed very intuitive to us that the people who have capital in the deal should be de-risked from the deal as quickly as possible. Our partners bring the capital, we bring the work, they get all their capital back, and then we have a 50-50 split after that for an indefinite hold period. About a 20 to 25-year hold period is what we're targeting. That's also very different in private equity, where a typical hold might be 18 months to, maybe 4 or 5 years. Well, that wasn't interesting to us. Like to us, that doesn't feel like real estate investing. We've never sold a single asset. We've always been big believers in increasing the value of a property, doing a cash out refi, keeping that original property, benefiting from the cash flow, the debt pay down, opportunities for more forced appreciation, opportunities for market appreciation, and then just growing the portfolio. And it just always seemed so strange to us of like, well, if you could cash out refi, why in the world would you ever sell? There's, expenses related to selling. There's tax consequences. We joke that like the biggest mistake we ever made was naming our company Black Swan Real Estate. We should have named it Golden Goose Real Estate, but we had a following with Black Swan, so we stuck with it. Why would you ever slay your golden goose, right? Leverage it and keep it. So when we hold those properties and our investors are in that infinite rate of return period with us, another one of the things that's really different is typically at a cash out refi, the investors are exited from the deal. I think that's really unethical. I think investors are then in the riskiest part of the deal, right? The value add part. And then they're gone for the good part, which is the infinite rate of return part. It's also very tax efficient because you're deferring any depreciation recapture for decades. A cash out refi is completely tax neutral in the eyes of the IRS. So when you get that distribution from a cash out refi, every single penny of it is for the investor to keep. So basically, we just took, our own portfolio and we said, okay, all this wealth that we created for our own family, how did we do it? We'd buy a property, we'd fix it up, we'd harvest the equity. In our, when it was our own capital, we would invest it in the next thing. With our passive investors, we return the capital to them so that they can decide if they want to invest in the next thing or use that capital, however they want, but then continue to hold those properties and grow that portfolio. So as we scaled into private equity, we just created our private equity structure to match that with the firm belief that if that's how it worked for our family, then that's the model we should take to the market. We shouldn't take on this private equity, traditional model that wasn't in alignment with our values, that felt like it was very, very pro GP and not very pro LP.
And your LPs love you for it, I'm sure. I'm sure you've made some amazing partners that way.
They do. There's definitely a moment where they're like, oh, really?
Is this for real?
Tell me again how that works. And the vertical integration is a huge piece of it too, as I described with the multiple, that because we have all of those pieces of the vertical integration chain and we keep that profit at the asset level, that's good for our investors. It's good for us as we participate in the split. It gets us to that cash out refi faster. Yeah. But yes, when it clicks for people, they're like, wow, I'll never invest anywhere else. Like, why would I?
Yeah, I love it.
Wow,
well, I know as we're getting to the end here, we've talked about some of the why that has motivated your decisions in building the business and what you're doing. I'm curious, maybe we can kind of land the plane here by just talking about, all right, where are things headed? As you look ahead, what are the things that you're excited about? What are you building towards? And what are you hoping to leave behind?
That is such a good question. I'm a big believer in visioning. I'm a big believer that what separates humans from all other animals is that we can see the future and then we can consciously move toward it. So setting big goals for ourselves as people, constantly dedicating time to meditation and our spiritual growth and the growth in our marriage and our children and passing down our value system to our children, continuing to grow the business. The next big goal is $1 billion in assets under management, really changing the industry. I would love it if you're a limited partner and you want to come alongside and invest with us. We'd love that. If you're a general partner, listen to our business model and say, is there a way I could do a deal like that? If we could, kind of bend the arc of capitalism to be pro LP, to be pro investor, that's really a big goal we have on our hearts over the next 10, 20, 30 years. Continuing to grow in other markets. We have no particular market defined at this point. We're still very much dedicated to Rochester and Tacoma, but we know we want this to be a nationwide thing. We want people to be able to say, I want to live in a Black Swan living community. And just like you can go to any community and find a Hilton or a Marriott, we want people to be able to go to any community and say, I want to live in a Black Swan home. So that's our decades long goal. And then just continuing to grow. We are definitely people that love growth and being open to co-creating that with the universe of the visions that we have for the future. And then being open to guidance of, what do we hear? What do we see? What pulls on our hearts? What takes us in a direction that maybe we wouldn't have anticipated, kind of like in 2020 when I, sort of unexpectedly left medicine and everything that came from that. So very much a belief that we're kind of co-creating our lives.
Elaine, and in that, I love the answer. I'm not letting you off the hook. I want to go just a little deeper there. And the reason is because we ended similarly with Nick. And it was, hey, y'all have accomplished more in the last 4, 5, 6 years than most people could dream of accomplishing. And Nick, very just big voice saying, hey, we're going to get to $1 billion. We're going to grow it. And it was like, why? Like, what is that? Because you said, hey, we want to keep growing. We're people. So what is in you that really fuels that we want to keep going?
That's a good question. Here's an answer that doesn't directly hit it, but I think is important. So about 6 months ago, people had asked me for coaching for, probably years. And I had always said, no, I'm busy growing the company. I'm busy, stewarding our investors' capital. It's hard to grow a team from 0 to 50 in just a few years. And then one day I just said, I have a belief system, a way of thinking about the world that I've curated over my lifetime that I can really serve other people with. And so I was on a plane ride home and I hand wrote it all out on a piece of paper. And I wrote a coaching program. I call it Freedom and Legacy Blueprint MD. And we had 56 people in our first cohort. And it's distinctly not a real estate coaching program. If people want to talk about real estate, side gigs, business, career, all the things, I'm happy to talk about it. But basically, we have modules around building an empowering story, putting your physiology first, having close, connected relationships, creating an infinite future, doing visioning, and then moving toward that, goal setting, getting things on your calendar, prioritizing your time. And then we have our live coaching calls where people can just ask anything they want. So we talk about marriages and children and real estate deals and parents and just kind of the whole human experience. It's definitely a way for me to bring together my own lived experience, my psychiatry training, my business experience, the real estate work, my marriage, children. And that has given me so much joy to see other people's transformation, to see other people's growth, to have them reflect as a result of this coaching, this happened and I feel differently about this and I think about myself differently in this way. And when I do my coaching calls, I would say like a typical coaching call, these are group coaching calls in the industry, might be like an hour or maybe 90 minutes. And we'll go for 5, 6, 7 hours. And people will ask how do you have the stamina to do that? And I honestly say I don't know. Yeah. I personally have a connection with God. That doesn't mean the people that I coach have to. I believe in all, various, religious beliefs and spiritual beliefs, but I feel as though it's just sort of flowing through me. I just get into the zone and I ask myself, how can I serve people? How can I love people? How can I alleviate suffering? How can I move people more toward joy? And in that coaching program, I just get to do it. And before you know it, 6 or 7 hours have passed and it's midnight or 1 a.m. And I'm okay, guys, we got to call it a night, but I'll see you next week. And we'll pick up wherever we need to, right? To make sure that everyone is taken care of. And it's the same thing in real estate. It's the same thing in working with our investors and seeing how can we create joy for them? How can we create experiences where they have decades of very tax efficient passive income coming in and what that means for their family and their children and their legacy and the things that they want to do and the dreams they have on their hearts. And how can we create amazing careers for people so that they understand the value that they bring to the world and they have a reason to wake up in the morning and to be excited about serving the community. And how can we create these amazing places where people just love living? And it's not just oh yeah, I live in that apartment. It's I live in that community and I'm known and I'm seen and I'm valued. And I just think it just comes back to I just really love people. I just love human beings. I think we're really interesting. We're just really neat in how we were created and or evolved, whatever you want to believe. And it just gives me so much energy to wake up in the day and say, how can I enjoy being a human, my own self, with prayer and exercise and experiencing nature and all of the things? And then how can I enjoy the humans around me and move people toward growth? And in doing so, grow my own self, inevitably with it.
Yeah. I'm fired up, like just in hearing you talk, and joy exudes from you. You can feel it as you talk about all of these things, and I love it. I mean, what I hear in there is that the $1 billion goal is not because of the money in and of itself, but because of what it represents in terms of the good things grow. And by growing the portfolio that you have, I mean, that's more Black Swan communities. That's more of where your tenants are getting to experience in this joyful environment that you're creating. It's more, hopefully, financial and time freedom for you and Nick to keep building, even apart from the business, the things that you're passionate about, more freedom for you to do the coach. Anyhow, maybe I'm reading in too much, but that's what I hear, at least in what you're saying there. And I just think that is awesome. So I know we're short on time. I also know that we could talk for hours more. So that makes me think that we'll have to do a follow-up at some point here. In the meantime, for listeners that do want to connect with you, for anybody who has had their mind blown like we have about your offering to limited partners, where's the best place for folks to both connect with you as well as to learn more about opportunities within Black Swan?
Absolutely. Our website is meetblackswan.com. Meetblackswan.com tells you all about us, the company, our portfolio, our social media is on there. We have a monthly live Zoom call that we do called Community Power Hour, where we just teach on like a particular topic or bring in a guest. We do our visioning each year there in our Community Power Hour. There's lots of different ways to connect with us, and all of it can be found there at meetblackswan.com.
That's awesome. Well, I will include a link to that in the show notes, so listeners, do check that out. Be sure to also share this episode with a friend. Send it to someone who you know could use a little bit more joy in their day, as well as some inspiration. This has been such a rich conversation, Elaine.
Thank you for having me.
Time.
I appreciate it.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next time, and thanks for hanging out with us.